This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Dan O'Brien, K-State grain economist, begins the show with a grain market update. He discusses crop progress, the Brazilian corn crop, and risk management. K-State wheat production specialist Romulo Lollato continues today's show with different causes of whiteheads in wheat. There are many reasons producers could be seeing white in their fields. Rounding out this week's shows is Chip Redmond, K-State meteorologist, with a weather update. Chip says there is hope that Kansas will soon see a change in the weather pattern. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today on this Friday, and we start our show, as we usually do, with K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien to give us a grain market update. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby. I appreciate it.
Starting off the show a little bit differently than we usually do, we're actually going to talk about the crop progress. So what are you seeing with that, Dan?
Well, as of Sunday, it looked like we were up to speed with most of the planting and or crop development for wheat that we were expecting for corn. As of May 28th, again, now that's at the beginning of this last week, we were at 82% planted and 66% actually emerged of corn, and that those were both right around 5-year averages. For sorghum, we were 22% planted, and that was actually 17% ahead of 17% where the normal 5-year average. And if sorghum is being planted in some of the drier areas, that makes sense. They'd be able to get into the fields. We still could have some late planting of sorghum, depending on how insurance and wheat fields work out, but we'll see it in coming weeks where that goes. For winter wheat headed, 84% as of May 28th. Normally at that time, we're about 90%, so just a little bit slow, but it's not the heading right now. It's the crop health and harvested acres and things that you and I have discussed for a while. When you look at soybean planting and emergence, as of May 28th, we were 71% planted. Normally, we're 52%. So we're running ahead on soybeans. And for emergence, 46% as of, again, May 28th versus 33%. So strong pace, ahead of pace, actually, on the soybean side. Again, dryness in some areas all helps that. For cotton, really pretty much on pace. 59% planted as of May 28th, 60% 5-year average as of that time. Interesting cotton conditions still in southern Kansas. Most of these areas still 47% fair, 40% good. And, this was several days ago. So actually, as we sit right now in areas that we're able to get into the field, we'd be ahead of that at this point. So really no major delayed planting concerns at this point. Really, we're as concerned in some of the dry areas of even after emergence of having ongoing moisture to keep crops going. So that's kind of where we stand at this time.
Looking at that along with the futures, seeing a little bit of maybe correlation to things that are happening?
Well, that's right. When you look at futures prices, we're in a time of volatility. When you look at historic volatility indices over the last several years, you come into June, July, you tend to see markets hopping around a lot. They can hop up and they can hop down. As of yesterday's close, July, corn was at 592.5, Dees at 530. So the market's putting its billfold, I guess, in terms of it's putting together its expectation that prices will drop some, again, from 592 currently down to 530. Soybeans lead contract 1329, 1169 for the November contract. So again, more than $1, and a half thereabouts of decline into harvest anticipated, at least as of yesterday. And then for wheat, again, the July contract, 802.5 close yesterday, 797 for September. And actually, well, for soybeans, we were up 29 cents per bushel. So a pretty strong day for the August-July contracts. November up 22. July for hardwood winter wheat up 12 cents. September up 12, and any more, we're at historically lofty levels for wheat. So if we bounce around 10, 15 cents a day, it's almost not that much of a shocker for people. The July contract for corn was about even to down a penny, but Dees was up 8 cents. So still, I think this much movement still shows a lot of unanswered questions. And we're just in the very beginning of July. A lot of concerns in parts of the Corn Belt that they're still hanging out there. A lot of dryness, not just in parts of Kansas, but through on into Nebraska, Iowa, and Illinois, Indiana, et cetera. So the markets seems to be assuming that moisture will come, we'll have no problems. And I guess until further notice, that's kind of where it's betting. So interesting.
And we'll hear more about the weather further down the show when we talk with Chip Redmond. And he is hopeful that possibly middle of June we'll see some, but kind of coming back now to the present, beginning of June, what are cash and futures looking like?
The cash bids and the basis working off those futures contracts are kind of following the same pattern we've been in for a while. Still very strong in Southwest Kansas. The cash price bid for corn, $7.38 in Garden City area. That's the top one. There's one or two that stand out about a dime higher than the rest. And for new crop bid, $5.95. That's 65 over. And really those bids stand out above the rest of the state. That 146 positive basis for corn compares to really 55. Well, in Topeka, 55 over, Salina, 60 over, 66 in Columbus. Colby at 80, you have a 93 cent bid over. So we still see pretty strong corn price bids for most spots of Kansas. And really right now it's of concern. You and I talked about this before we came on air, is that the cash corn versus cash wheat price situation in Garden City. You've got a Garden City hard red winter wheat price of about $7.78. So $7.38 for corn as a spot bid, $7.78 for wheat. You've got a ratio of about 105%. And the historic ad hoc rule of thumb has been that once cash prices in areas where we have livestock feeders, once cash prices for wheat get down to about 105% of cash corn prices, well, then suddenly you're at about a break-even situation for feeding wheat. So here in the markets, we hear, and the problem this year for that in Kansas is that in that feedlot area, we don't have a lot of cash wheat. That'll be coming, and that's where a lot of the drought damage is at. Still some wheat in the region. We do hear rumors of wheat possibly being considered soft red winter wheat from the Eastern Corn Belt being brought in that have to be railed in. So that strong cash price in the Garden City area is in play and probably maybe attracting some wheat feeding. And as you and I have talked, Shelby, in the past sessions, it really brings to bear this issue of how many supplies do livestock feeders and corn users have on hand to get them through until the next crop. And if things turn pretty tight and we have wheat crops coming on that may be in looser hands and some whatever remains of feed grains, well, maybe this is an opportunity for some wheat feeding. It's something that I wasn't adequately anticipating, but we'll see. So it's pretty stark to look at that cash price ratio and some of the information we put together and see 105%, and that's a signal for wheat feeding. And if that's happening, then where people do have wheat in the state, well, maybe it's truckable. If you can cover shipping costs to get wheat into those Southwest regions, maybe that's an opportunity for folks. So I think we'll be watching that pretty closely here as we're now into June and as we head on into harvest.
And kind of coming outside of the state, what is Brazil doing with their corn crop?
The latest news that keeps coming out of Brazil is that, if anything, report after report, these private reports keep raising the Brazilian corn crop. Latest numbers on June 1st, yesterday, came out from a Reuters source in country showing 133 or 134 million bushels total corn production for Brazil this year, and 102 out of the second crop. And that number, I can recall, it wasn't that long ago, about 2-3 months ago, they were looking at 126 million metric tons. So, they keep raising that number. We do hear reports of different crops being brought into the United States from Brazil, from elsewhere. There's a report of that happening from Europe, of wheat coming in from Europe here about a week ago, which of course got the attention of a lot of the wheat growing organizations here in the U.S. If prices move sharply lower for corn, for soybeans, that we've heard some reports of that happening, probably hear more. And it really does I understand that's a challenge to accept that on terms of U.S. growers' perspective. But really, if we didn't have the type of short crop that we had at the end of last year and then tough conditions, we probably wouldn't be thinking anything about this. So to me, I think it's part of the process of trying to get through to the next crop that we might end up and have the economics dictate that we're bringing in some crops from outside the U.S. to fill the gap.
And as we round out this conversation for today, talking about difficult times, risk mitigation.
It's always interesting to me to see what put option prices are that show how much the market would charge someone right now to sell the futures and carry and take away any risk of margin calls. And you can get lost in the technical weeds pretty quick. But one thing to remember, if you look at yesterday's close at $5.30 D's corn, that the price of a put option for price protection, to protect from prices moving below 530 is 41 cents. So what's that mean? That means you'd have to drop the 41 cents and a couple cents for paying the broker's fee to break even. So that's protecting basically about 485, 489, something like that. So the market is kind of saying 480, 489 right now by what it's bidding on those options. And for November soybeans, with November closing at 11.69, you look at 11.60 as what's the market charging for insurance there? You're looking at basically 56 cents. So 11.60 minus 56 cents, the market's basically offering through put options about 11.60. So, most ag producers, if they look at that, they're considering forward pricing, forward contracting versus these options, leave the top side open. And I guess maybe the positive side of that is that, 41 cents for corn, 60 cents for soybeans. The market still thinks there's some risk of the price moving a lot higher because it's charging for it. So thought-provoking to me anyway.
Dan, I appreciate you coming on and giving us a grain market update once again.
Thank you very much, Shelby. Appreciate it.
That was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. His work will be linked in today's show notes, which you can find on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but when we come back, we'll be joined with Romulo Lollato. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show today with K-State wheat production specialist Romulo Lollato, and he's going to discuss possible causes for whiteheads in wheat. Romulo, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby. It's great to be here with you as always.
The first thing to talk about here that I've read and heard about is freeze injury.
Yeah, definitely. So this time of the year, right, mid to late May and early June, it's very normal for us to start seeing just whiteheads popping up in wheat fields. And they can have different causes, right? And they can cause different magnitudes of yield loss depending on the amount of whiteheads or the frequency of whiteheads that we have out there. So we can go over some of those causes now. And as you mentioned, freeze injury, it's definitely one of them. If we look back, when would we have had freeze damage this year in Kansas, right? There was a late April when temperatures got down to about 24 degrees or so. And then later in April or the first part of May, actually the temperatures got down to around 28 degrees or so in different parts of the state, right? And the crop was at different stages of development depending where we were in the state. Perhaps it was already going through that boot or early heading stage of development in the south central, southeast part of Kansas. And as we moved towards the northwest, it was behind, right? It was probably still during those early stem elongation stages. So right now, we're not necessarily seeing much of that freeze damage to those crops that were in that delayed development, like in the early stem elongation phase, like in the northwest part of the state. But in the majority of the central part of Kansas, symptoms of freeze damage have been a very common theme. And those symptoms, they can look different ways, right? Perhaps it can be just the top portion of the head that got burned back by that freeze. Then in that case, the beard, they would be all twisted up and not necessarily very straight there. It could occur just in the bottom part of the head or even in the middle, right? So different symptoms of freeze damage there showing up depending on when the cold temperatures occurred and what growth stage was the crop at that point in time. Again, we've been seeing that kind of across the central part of the state, more predominantly probably from Minneapolis or Salina south and west from there. Not as much symptoms of freeze damage in the north central, northwest part of the state, at least what we've seen so far.
And staying on the topic of weather and causing whiteheads, what about hail?
So hail damage is another potential cause for whiteheads in wheat, right? And fields that got hail damage is very easy to identify because all those heads, they're probably going to look pretty ragged, right? There will be heads that are going to be broken in half, heads that just lost some of the spikelets out of that, heads that got broken in half, and so it's going to be very, very random head shapes in that field. Again, just because the hail is damaging the different heads differently there, depending on where it hits and so on. So very common as well to see whiteheads showing up in hail-affected fields. In terms of Kansas this year, there was a very severe hailstorm in that early May time frame that hit from that Roselle all the way until about Great Bend or so. There's kind of like a 8 to 10 mile wide swath there where a lot of fields got zeroed out. And the fields that did not get zeroed out got some severe hail damage symptoms out there. But that's not the only ones, right? We have like lighter hailstorms here and there, kind of across the state. Just last week I was stopping in a field near Phillipsburg that was showing some symptoms of hail damage as well. So the whiteheads are going to show in hail-damaged fields. Whenever that head only lost a couple or three spikelets, it's not uncommon for us to see the rachis of the plant become pink or purple. And that's a symptom that, think of that, the spikelet that was right there, it was a sink, right? It was pulling a lot of resources from the plant. So whenever we take that sink away, those resources would accumulate in that rachis in the wheat head. And essentially that purpling that we see, that's essentially just sugar accumulation where it should be going to a spikelet. There's no spikelet there because of the hail. Well, it kind of becomes pink or purple.
Continuing through the different causes, on the flip side of freeze, heat stress.
Absolutely. And, this year, I think that we're seeing much more heat stress than we give it credit for. I mentioned those couple of freeze damages in late April that we had. But then just a week after that, just on that May 7th and May 8th time frame, temperatures in the state, they got really hot. I mean, they got in parts of, like, for example, McPherson, where it got up to 96 degrees Fahrenheit, so extremely hot for a crop that was still just on the early stages of grain field or just heading at that point in time. For most of central Kansas going into southwest Kansas, we had anywhere from 8, 9, or even 12 hours of when temperatures were above 82 Fahrenheit. So those temperatures, they came together with some pretty high winds there. And so that combination of dry, and we were really dry, right? And so the combination of drought with hot, windy events, that can be very damaging to the crop. Now, it would appear in the field more uniform than, how do we look for those symptoms in the field, right? It's usually going to appear more uniform than a freeze damage. So you go into a field and a freeze damage, you have top thirds of the head that got damaged, bottom thirds, middle, and so on. In this case of heat stress, we're seeing that the top thirds of those heads have been very consistently bleached out. They were essentially scorched out by the heat stress. And another difference that we see as well is that the beards of those heads, or the awns, they don't necessarily look all twisted up and messy. They're actually just straight, right? But essentially those upper spikelets, they just dry out by those hot, dry, windy events. And so that has been very consistently in fields that I walked into, like McPherson, Newton, Salina region. So very consistent in that central portion of the state. And again, many times we're diagnosing that as freeze damage when in fact it was heat stress. Beyond those white heads that we see, just the top thirds of those white heads very consistently showing up, if we look a little bit closer into some of the other spikelets in those fields, they may not have pollinated. And so there may not be a grain developing there, and those florets might just be getting mushy and brown. And if they're getting brown and we're not seeing anything develop there, there's a chance that they haven't become white yet, but they're pretty much gone, right? And so that's a concern as well, because what we see with our eyes is the white head thirds out there. But if you start opening up some more spikelets, many times there's just not a grain developing there because the heat stress caused some sterility on those flowers.
And now moving away kind of from the weather, but more to diseases that are causing whiteheads.
Yeah, so again, as I mentioned before, there's a number of diseases that can cause whiteheads as well, right, that start appearing this time of the year. One of them is dryland root rot, right, also known as dryland foot rot. And this is a disease that is caused by the fungus Fusarium. So essentially, if you see a whitehead showing up, and you can trace that whitehead down all the way to the base of that plant, right, you're going to see that it's not only a whitehead, but it's really a white peeler, right? And that white peeler, if you open it up or if you split it up and there is some pink sporulation in there, it's a very good indication that Fusarium root rot. Now, this disease, it's quite common in drier years, as the one that we have had this year. And it's more common in cereal-based rotation, so where wheat's going after sorghum or wheat's going after corn or wheat on wheat. If we break that rotation down with a legume like a soybean or even like a canola, like a brassica or something like that, it tends to decrease the incidence of that disease. But again, in dry years, especially in cereal-based rotations, that's going to be quite common. Another few diseases that can cause these whiteheads are Takal and sharp eye spot, a couple of other diseases that would cause kind of similar symptoms where that entire tiller just becomes white and bleached out. Perhaps we're not going to see that as much this year unless in some bottom ground where maybe some water have accumulated there. And we can also be seeing another disease that perhaps a little bit too early for us to be seeing these unless in the south central part of the state, which is a head scab or Fusarium head blight, right, which is a disease that will affect individual spikelets within a given head that will also produce some of that pink or that pink sporulation.
We've talked about weather, we've talked about diseases, but what about wheat stem maggots?
So wheat stem maggots is another very common cause of whitehead in wheat, here in Kansas at least. And it's very easy to identify when that whitehead is caused by a wheat stem maggot. Essentially, the head will be totally white, and the very last internode, or just the neck of that plant, is also going to be totally white. But if you go down on that internode, when you reach that flag leaf is green, and the rest of the plant is green, right? So it's just the very top of the plant that becomes white. Now, when you pull that head out, it should come out super easy, and you're able to observe that in the very end of that internode, it has been chewed, right? It has been actually bitten or chewed there by a little maggot. And that's the wheat stem maggot. Usually it's not an economic concern for us here in Kansas, and so the incidence is so low within a field that usually not an economic concern, but it's very, very common. I've been seeing that this year anywhere from here in Riley County, Manhattan, all the way until south central Kansas and the northwest part of the state as well. So again, it's very common to see that wheat stem maggot causing white wheat head.
Romulo, thank you for coming in and sharing some information about what might be causing whiteheads in wheat for our producers. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Shelby.
That was K-State wheat production specialist Romulo Lollato. He recently wrote an agronomy update on possible causes for whiteheads in wheat, which will be linked in today's show notes, which you can find on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with the weather. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude this Friday show with our usual weather update. And as always, we're joined by K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us.
Hey, howdy.
So on a little bit of a positive note, it's rained some places this past week.
Yeah, we have had moisture, especially focused in the west and in the east over the last week, and some of the moisture's been pretty heavy in places. We saw up to 5 inches of rain around Overbrook, Ottawa, and even when we get further north and west around Graham County, Hill City area, they got 5 inches as well, even up into Norton County. So isolated areas of really heavy rain, but most folks in western and eastern Kansas saw moisture.
So you left out central Kansas. Are they going to hopefully get some moisture?
Yeah, so hopefully last night central Kansas got some moisture. But overall, they've been the driest area in the state by far. Just driving through there, the corn's starting to roll up, and it's not nearly as mature as in other places. And the grass is starting to brown out again even. So which are signs of persistent, exceptional drought in the region. And they just keep missing the moisture. They need about an inch to an inch and a quarter a week to keep up with precipitation averages right now, and they haven't gotten that. And so they have a long ways to go, and they need some of this moisture badly to just keep things growing, or else they're going to slip into a worse drought.
And Chip, before we started this, you mentioned that Kansas is almost like Florida, which is something I never thought I'd hear. How is that?
Yes, we still have this persistent pattern that's been in place where we have high pressure off to our north and east, and really just Groundhog Day. Same thing, day after day. But now we've basically gotten that Gulf moisture moved northward and has been sucked into, I guess, a lack of a better word, this high pressure system. And so we have enough moisture to, as soon as we get solar heating in the mornings and in early afternoons, we get basically tropical convection, thunderstorm activity that might have a little bit of small hail, but overall isn't severe. It goes up and then falls apart right away, and they move very slowly and drop very heavy rain amounts very quickly. So really, really tropical air mass and Florida-like pattern that we're in right now.
And is this a pattern we're maybe going to see break moving forward?
Yeah, it looks like we're going to keep this pattern, unfortunately or fortunately for the folks who haven't had rain yet, through the next week at least. We start to see some light at the end of the tunnel, maybe the pattern breaking a little bit around the 10th, and that would mean a more progressive pattern that would bring a storm system in from the south that would just at least provide some wind shear to get these complexes to move and affect more than just isolated areas. So it would still be a fairly wet pattern, but it would be more organized with some severe weather potential as well.
Chip, what about the drought monitor? Is it looking better or is it looking worse?
Yeah, so with the recent rainfall, especially in the western third of the state, we have seen some drought improvements, especially along the Colorado border. And then in northwest Kansas, we had 1 category improvement. So we're slowly shrinking down that exceptional and extreme drought area. But in that region, when we get further east, we actually saw drought expansion. Granted, some of the folks in east and even central saw moisture this week. It unfortunately wasn't enough. It happened after the cutoff, which is Tuesday morning. So a drought expansion for a pretty wide area of north central and northeast Kansas of a 1 category degradation. So drought expanded in that area.
Talked a little bit about moisture, but what about the temperatures?
Yeah, so where we're seeing persistent moisture, like in the southwest, where they're getting rain almost every day right now, they're cooler than normal. Their highs should be around that mid-80 degree mark, and they're struggling to get to 80 most days because you have the cloud cover. And then as you get further north and east, it kind of seems counterintuitive, but they're warmer since there's drier. In central and eastern Kansas, they're getting temperatures that are at to slightly above average. So we're looking 88, 89 to near 90, which is a degree or two above average.
And as we're beginning June, as we look forward, what can people expect to see?
When we hit that pattern break around the 10th, a lot will determine just how strong that storm system is when it comes in and if it can truly break the pattern down, which we've struggled to do that for the last, month now, I feel like. And so if that does happen, we could see a potential for cooler than normal temperatures extend across the state briefly, and then I think we're going to start to see summer warmth start to build in by late June.
Maybe some hope for breaking the pattern, but we'll hear more about it hopefully next week and hopefully get to hear that the pattern is breaking. Chip, I appreciate you coming in and talking with us.
Yep, thanks for having me.
That was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. That's all we have for you this week on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with you on Monday.